This is, I've got about 3 or 4 books that are coming out. One has just come out called Beyond Managing Magic, Landing the Plane, where I got a sort of an intuitive message. You get frustrated in this field, and when is this thing all going to unravel? And basically it comes down to the phenomena, whatever it is running the show. And they basically said to me, don't worry, we know how to land the plane. So that's the 4th book of the disclosure I've done. And the 5th book I'm going to do is a book on very controversial. I'm going to say I don't want the U.S. government to disclose. I'm not in favor of that, especially when you get in Canada now. I live in Canada, and 27% of people in Canada consider the United States an enemy now. And in Greenland, 85% of people consider the U.S. a threat. So the last thing we want is the U.S. military having any more weapons, which they can drop on my grandson. So that's for the 5th book. But what it says is we want disclosure, and true disclosure is to go to the experiencers, not to the government. The government, this whole operation that's going on now in front of Congress, if you'll see, Michael brought up the fact that it should be brought in front of science. So when this thing went public, who did they go to? Did they go to the Science and Technology Committee in the House and the Senate? No, they went to Armed Services and Intelligence. That's all weapons. This is a move to get funding for weapon programs, and that's what we need. The message is oneness coming from the intelligence, and that's going to come if you start listening to the experiencers. I've said that all along. The only thing you can learn about lights in the sky is to know that something's going on. When you got to talk to people who are dealing with the intelligence itself, and there's a lot of these people running around, and they tell some very interesting stories, which I'll sort of relate to today. The other thing I always want to remind people of is that the phenomena is morphing. It is not the same phenomena. It keeps changing. This is 1895, 1896, the year that radioactivity was discovered. This massive flap in Europe and the United States, and the phenomena appears to us according to our experiences. Michael, Shirley no, hang on. The experiencer in California, who's the stepson of Barbara Streisand, told me that he's dealing with the experiences, with the phenomena. He said that what they told him is, when we come into your world, we go into your head and we find out what's in your head, and whatever's in your head, that's what we build a lesson with. And that's why you see that the phenomena since 1896 has morphed. It was started with the airships. And I say, anybody thinks this is extraterrestrial, these guys said they were from Mars. And I say, if you really believe this is extraterrestrial, do you actually believe that these things flew through the vacuum of time and space on a wooden ship with propellers on it and came from Mars? And this thing is that they're morphing as we develop our intelligence. This phenomenon keeps changing. It was this, then it was the green fire, the Foo Fighters, then it was green fireballs, then it was the Bell ships of Adamski, then came the Greys in 1961, then came the triangles, then came the crop circles, then came the cattle mutilations, and this thing is morph. They just keep turning the pages, and we watch as they land the plane. They know what they've done. They've probably done this on 1,000 different planets. They know exactly what they're doing and how they're disclosing this phenomena, whatever it might be. This is a book. There's actually a book on all the different types of beings. And if you look before 1961, there are no grays. I don't care what anybody says. You get all these things. One's got a long nose. One looks like a mummy. Seem not to have a head. Dwarfs, well proportioned. There was one even with corduroy pants on. And you look and you see that there are no two aliens that basically look the same. They all basically the same. And what you see is this reflection from the 1940s and 1950s is you'll see aliens, a humanoid with helmet. You'll see helmets with visors, with hoses going down into tubes on the back. This is all science fiction cartoons, stuff from the 1940s and 50s that is reflecting what we believe. And when we go into fear, you're going to see one type of being, and if you see angelic, you're going to see these etheric type beings. And we forget the thing that was said by Wheeler. This is a participatory world. We are part of the phenomena that we're watching. And so I started looking at it. I'm writing a book called Extraterrestrial or Maybe Not. And this is the sort of the phenomena that when you look at, you mentioned before the Billy Meyer sightings, and Billy Meyer, everybody said, "Oh, and Billy Meyer, he's hanging these things from strings. No problem. That's what he's doing. He has these models." And then, of course, they digitalized the thing and they blew it up so you could see the string, and there was no string there. But when you start looking at the encounters with the beings, what you suddenly realize, especially the grays, is you see these strings. You go like, "What? Something's going on. This doesn't make any sense." For example, breathing. When Jacobs talked about them doing the mind scan, where the gray would look directly into the person's eyes, be about 1 inch away from the person's head, he would always say to them, "Is he breathing?" And they'd go, "No, he's not breathing." So if he's not breathing, is this an extraterrestrial being from another planet? Has no nose, has no mouth, no eyelids, has these big, huge eyes. But how do you keep the dirt out of the eyes? But it doesn't have eyelids. This is like a string. It's like, maybe something's wrong here. Maybe this should tell us that maybe we're dealing with something different. Aging. I asked Betty Andreas and her husband. They had their first UFO encounter with an alien in 1946. And I talked to them when they were in the 80s. And I said, "Betty, I mean, you had a first encounter in 46. Did the alien ever get any older?" And then her husband said, "No, never got any older, but aliens live a long time." And that's what you'll find. If you ask people, their whole life they had an encounter with a single being. And the weird thing is, I even bypass everything. I said, "Were you on the ship?" "Yeah." "Who's the guy you were dealing with? Who's the main guy you were dealing with?" And they always have a name for the guy. There's all the little grays around. They don't talk to them. There's one person that seems to be talking to. And a lot of them will say, for example, Chris Bledsoe. They asked Chris Bledsoe in the transcript that I had. Chris lost it. I provided him the transcript for his book. In the transcript of his 2008 regression, they asked him, "When did you first encounter these beings?" And you got to remember, he was a deacon in a very strict Pentecostal church. So he was very Christian oriented and no idea of reincarnation. And they asked him, when did you first encounter these beings? He said, "They have been with me since before I was born." And then the regressionist from Harvard, a friend of John Mack, said, "In your last lifetime?" And he said, "Yes." So if they're in our last lifetime, if these beings are in our last, then you got to reconsider as to what are these beings? What's really going on here? If you look at the alien autopsy, I released the alien autopsy document, which I thought was the most important document I had ever seen. And everybody just sort of ignored it. Kit Green actually admitted that all the stuff was true. And in the alien autopsy, they supposedly recreated the being from damaged film. And if you look on the alien autopsy being, you'll see it doesn't have a belly button. Well, that was what people report on I ask him, "Does he have a belly button?" "Nope, doesn't have a belly button." And then I say, "Does he have sex organs?" And he goes, most people say, "No, he didn't have sex organs." And I go, "Doesn't that seem kind of strange to you that he's a biological being and he's here and they're raping women and they don't have sex organs?" And I go, "Yeah, it is kind of weird. Never thought of that before." Or they don't have any clothes on. Like, why don't they have clothes? "I don't know. I never thought about that. Don't have any clothes on." Or they have clothes that's like spray painting. The clothes like spray painting. Nobody's ever seen the toilet, so they don't have a waste system. They don't seem to eat. They don't seem to drink. And the weirdest one that I have is people will describe, "I don't know how they stood up on these legs. They're like, they're sticks. It was unbelievable. And their arms are like sticks. And they have no tendons and no muscles." And I don't care what anybody says. You cannot move a leg without a muscle. It's muscles and tendons. That's how you move the leg. So how are they moving their legs if they don't have any muscles and tendons? And the thing with guns, that people will talk about shooting these beings, and the beings flip over, and they disappear, or they just walk off, and you can't kill them, or they go through walls and windows. And then you got to start saying, what are we really dealing with? And when you look at it, it's like everything else in nature. It gets more complex and more complex and more complex and more complex. And if you take a look at the people at the level like James Lukatsky, who ran the OSAP program, he will tell you that this thing is unbelievably complex in terms of what we're actually dealing with here. This is this reflection idea that people will talk about grays, reptilians, mantids. And I did 3 books on the Mission Rama, the opening these portals, they call Zendras at Mount Shasta. And there's 3 of the best cases I ever had. One had 6 witnesses inside the Zendra, 7 inside the Zendra. One had 8, one had 9. People levitated into the air with hundreds of beings, more beings than there was trees in the forest. And they were levitated into the air, and these beings were all around them. 9 witnesses. I interviewed 3 of them. And what you see from them, they're very religious. They're Roman Catholic, Latino people. And what you see, you don't see grays and reptilians. You see these like people that just popped out of the Bible. And this is Ann Terrell, who they're all muscular, look like swimmers. And Antarell in 2014 appeared, 7 witnesses, and they all said, yeah, he was there, and he was 10 feet tall. And I stood like about 15 feet from the tree where this guy was sitting, and these people were all in different locations inside the Zendra looking at him, and he was giving different message to everybody. Was getting a different message from him. And then in 2015, he appeared again, and a lot of the same people were in the Zendra. And one guy who was a Navy guy from 24 years, I said to him, I said, hey, you were in there? And he was just an interpreter. He wasn't supposed to be in the Zendra. I said, hey, were you in there? And he said, yeah. And I said, they said it was this year. He was a hologram. You could see through him and the 2 beings that he was with. And he said, he was not. What do you mean? Where did you get that from? I said, well, that's what all the other 7 people said. He said, look, Grant, I was close enough. I could see the lines in his face. It was not a hologram. It was a real thing. So you see people inside the Zendra seeing different things. And that's this idea of reflection. This is the commander of the craft, again, a woman, and almost like it could be a biblical figure. And we got to remember, we are part of what we're experiencing. There is no separation. It's all one thing. Here's a thing. This is the first time I ever showed this, and I'll do it pretty quickly. If you take a look, everybody says, oh, the grays. And if you start actually looking at the grays, okay, here's Betty Hill's gray. Take a good look at it and then compare it with Whitley Strieber's gray. Does it look the same? No, it's not even close. If you look at the other one that Whitley Strieber put out, nope, not even close. Look, here's Betty Andreasen's gray. Does it look the same as the others? No, it doesn't look the same. It has all these different figures, and this is this whole idea that in the end, I think it's going to be that all the grays, all the UFOs, and all the power systems are all going to be different. And this is something I'll get into when I talk about the people flying the ship. Here's the Crowley, the lamb that everybody said, oh, it was a gray. He was dealing with a gray. It looks similar, but not at all close. Here's, I can't remember where this one comes from. Oh, this is the Ariel School. So this is the Ariel School one. The one on the bottom is Yossi Ronan, an experiencer out of Israel. His gray, and you see people are talking grays, these beings, and you start looking at them and they're all different. The one and on the middle bottom there again looks different. That's the one that was supposedly from the UFO Cover Up Live documentary in 1988, the one that they supposedly had at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Here's one that Tim Taylor, the famous NASA guy that I had a meeting with, he introduced me to one experiencer. I was allowed to talk to her on his cell phone. This is one that she said of all the beings she saw, this is the closest to what she saw. And I've been in contact with her since 2013 when we had this meeting with Tim Taylor. Here's the one with Ron Johnson, who I'm now going to have a meeting with, or an interview that'll be on my White House UFO YouTube channel shortly. He's had experiences his entire life. And of course, his guy is called LB. LB actually took him to the spirit world to meet with his mother. And here again, you can see there are no muscles, no tendons. And Ron is just, he said it looked like a skeleton. He couldn't believe. And so this is his being. And now he's going to talk about, he's got a very bad heart condition, and he had 2 near-death experiences. He's in hospice care, and he's going to give me an interview about his near-death experiences. This one here is from Sims, who and his name was Tejabar. And he said, when asked, was he an alien? He said, no, he had been here 4,000 years ago. So he actually said he wasn't even an alien. And as I get through, when people confront them, a lot of them, I've never seen one that didn't, but they will all admit, no, we're not aliens. This is the beings. I remember these are the beings from Great Britain, and they're called Chan, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. They don't want to be known as anything. They don't want, and so I asked them the question, are you extraterrestrials? And their answer was, would you like us to be extraterrestrials? We could do that if you want. We could actually take you to our planet. But no, we're not extraterrestrials. We've always been here. You're the visitor. And the part about we've always been here, you're starting to hear this more and more all the time, that they're here, they've always been here, and we just can't see them. They can pop in, they can pop out. And this comes to the idea that there may be no time, no space. It may be all here now. All our lives are happening at the same time. And this idea of time and space is something that's really throwing us off. Forgotten Promises is Sherry Wild, who was one of the people that she had her book that her kids tried to get an injunction to stop her from publishing this book about the Forgotten Promise, that she had made this promise to come into the world and have this experience with her being, which is, his name was Da. She went to the publisher, finally forced the book into the publisher, and the publisher said, Betty, you said he's a gray. Yeah, she said he's a Zeta. Yeah, he's a gray. And he said, well, he said he's from Andromeda. So what's going on? He can't be from Andromeda. If he's gray, he's got to be from Zeta Reticuli. And she said, really? She had no idea. She goes, I'm going to ask him. So next time he comes, she just, okay, so what's the deal? Are you actually an alien? Like, what's going on here? And then Da said, no, that would not best describe who I actually am. I'm an etheric being on a mission in the cosmos for the creator. I don't know if you've heard the story with Michael Cullen. He has this experience, I think 2014, somewhere in there. He's sleeping on the side of the interstate going through Utah. And he wakes up, he sees this UFO over the top of the hill, and then falls back asleep again. And then suddenly he's out of his body and he's floating above this UFO, and he pops in there, and he's going down the hall with these two grays, one on one side, one on the other side. And there's this sort of a closet with these gray suits hanging there. And he walks by, and suddenly he's a gray. And he's looking at himself, and he's going, oh my goodness, I'm a gray. And he's looking at he's 6 feet tall, and he's looking at these beings. He's the same size as his beings, and he's looking at his hands. And this again indicates that the idea of who these beings are and what they can do is a little bit different than just simply they're extraterrestrials who have gotten lost in space and ended up on Earth. This is Yossi Ronan, and the message that he got sort of sums it up from his beings. And this is a best-selling book. We helped him publish this thing, and this is a really book. And the message is one. That's the main message that everybody has. Everything is one thing. It's all connected. It's all alive, and it's all conscious. This is what he was told. The way you see us is defined by you. When we visit your world, we temporarily have a physical body, defined in a certain way, but it is not the only form or our original essence. In our dimension, there is no need for a physical body described in a particular way as in yours. You share the definitions of reality that are given to you, but you are not yet aware of it. And this is this whole idea that we are all etheric beings. They're playing in their little stage role. They're on the stage saying their lines, and they're playing aliens. We're on stage. We're saying our lines, and we're playing humans. We're going to leave stage right, and we're going to go and back into an etheric being. We're going to go into another being for another experience. We're all etheric beings. We're all one. We're all connected, and we're all conscious. It's almost like one of the analogies is that we are like the wave of an ocean. We are an individual wave, but we're also part of the ocean. And we have to realize this, that we see everything as nouns. What science has done, it's changed everything from a noun, from a verb to a noun. Everything is a verb. Everything is changing. 1 million cells die in your body every second. They're reproduced by other cells. It's everything's moving. And if you take away time, you will see it's a verb, because everything is changing. Everything is even mountains are getting more rounded and stuff like this, and trees are growing on the mountain and stuff and you realize it's all one thing. And what time does is it stops things. As we see things in the here and now, and time allows science to make everything nouns. It's just a cloud, it's just a wave, it's just a person, it's just an energy form, it's just placebo, it's just super psi, it's just accident, it's just random, it's just this and that is nature, it's evolution, and they put names and nouns on everything. And what you do is you make everything where it's not alive, it's not conscious, and it's not connected to anything. It is a verb. Everything is a verb, and we're seeing it mistakenly as nouns because of time and space. Here's some developments. I'm working on about 5 different books, and here's some of the developments that I'm working on. The consciousness download started with me in 2012. It's still getting wider and wider. When I first had the download, it was just consciousness. I just knew it was something to do with ESP, and it came with absolute certainty, and I knew this is how it worked. But the idea of the mental, the consciousness thing has been around for a long time. This is from the top secret memo that was written by the Canadian government in 1950. Wilbur Smith went down to the United States to see what was going on. He talked to the Research and Development Board, which is the weapons people in Washington at that time, and he was told all this stuff. And number 5 is the most important thing. He said, we're also told other things might be associated with the saucers, such as mental phenomena. The Americans aren't doing very well because they've said if we're working on the problem, they're willing to exchange credentials and talk to us. So the whole thing was mental phenomena was known in 1950. They knew that mental phenomena. And the question was, how did you know that? Because the first encounter was not until Adamski 10 days after the detonation of the hydrogen bomb that came forward and said he was talking to aliens. Before that, really nobody was talking to aliens. So how do they know? And the way they probably knew was because they had a live alien at Roswell and the thing was talking in their heads, and they realized, like, oh my God, so there's this consciousness effect. And now it's elaborated, and I think the crafts are getting more complex. They're actually putting in more and more complex crafts, and I'll talk about one in a minute. Where you look at it and it's almost like James Lukatsky, who talked about publicly that he was allowed to talk about it, about getting inside a craft. And he was asked what was inside the craft. And he basically said, if you knew the answer to that, you'd know the whole rest of the book that I wrote was totally primitive. And he said, I can't talk about it right now. I'm going to try to get a clearance as to what was inside the craft. But here's a guy that ran the OSAP program and is being cleared to say certain things. The telepathy tapes is the other thing that's happening. So you have this movement in stuff being dropped, I believe, by people in the government. And then you have this unbelievable story of the telepathy tapes. I think I was the first or one of the first people to interview Kai Dickens. If you have not watched the telepathy tapes, you've got to go to Telepathy Tapes podcast. On Christmas Day, the podcast had 1.5 million listeners. So you say, well, we're not getting anywhere. We need disclosure. We need all this sort of stuff. The telepathy tapes, when you get 1.5 and you're the biggest podcast in the world, we're making ground. This is absolutely revolutionary. It's the most important thing I've seen in 50 years. And that is these nonverbal autistic people who are 100% telepathically have ability. 100. If you take a look at remote viewing, according to the stats, the really high-end remote viewing that just blows you away is only 5 to 10%. These kids are 100%. They are never wrong. And they are talking other languages that they've never spoken. And they're talking to dead people, and they're talking to God, and they're on a hill, all telepathically talking to each other. This is the most important thing that changes everything. And it's almost like they're landing the plane. They've allowed this to sort of slip out at this point, and all these things are coming together at the same time. This whole telepathy tapes has to do with, I wrote a book called Contact Modalities. I talk an awful lot about it, about the right brain, left brain. The left brain is the male brain. The right brain is the female brain. And the whole thing about paranormal phenomena, about getting into the field and pulling material out of the field, or telepathy, is the ability to shut the left brain, shut the male brain down that wants to have urinating contests and fight and be, egotistical and stuff like that. And the reason these kids are so highly telepathic is because they can't speak. The verbal center is in the left side of the brain. So they have left brain damage. And that's why they're so telepathic, is they can shut it down. And we can do it, as I put in the contact modalities. You can shut the left brain down using hypnosis. So what do you do in hypnosis? You say to the person, okay, just count your breath. Okay, count your breath. And the ego says, oh, yeah, I'm good. I am the best breath counter that ever lived. I can do that. And then about 10 seconds later, it sort of wanders off. Oh, I'm getting tired of doing this. I'm going to do something else. No, go back to the breath. Count your breath. And what the thing does is it makes the left brain shut down, because it's sitting there and it's going, oh, I hate this. And it just shuts down. And then, boop, you're in the field. Meditation is the same thing. It's shutting the left brain down. Psychedelics is shutting the ego. It collapses the ego. The ego's on the left side. Brain injuries, brain damage, such as non-speakers, will exhibit the abilities. Or people who've had UFO experiences will suddenly become psychic. And I have this at the bottom here. Entities. I always see the weird parts of stories that I also wonder, like, why does an alien wake people up? Like they wake them up before they abduct them. Like, what do you do that for? And what you're doing is the same thing. You're shutting the left brain down. You're getting the person to surrender. You're getting the person to dissociate, because the guy wakes up and goes, oh my God, I'm going to die. There's an evil alien standing beside my bed. And he just disassociates. And then they go, okay, Zogar, he's ready to go. And off they go, and they put him through the wall and do whatever they're going to do. Extreme dancing, pain, near-death experiences. And Conan's is one that it took me a while to understand. But the idea of a Conan, it's this whole thing, problems that can't be solved. Like, what's the sound of one hand clapping? And you say, well, that's a stupid question. And the left brain goes, yeah, what is the sound of one hand clapping? And then the left brain sits there and tries to figure it out. There must be a logical answer to that. And it just goes off, and you move it away, and then you're able to access the right brain, which is the female brain, which believes in oneness and let's all be a family. Let's do things together. Let's not fight and stuff like that. And that's this right brain, left brain thing, which is critically important, which has been sort of ignored. The UFO phenomena. This is a book that I've written that's actually sort of taking off now. This is the book on the UFO sky pilots And this goes at 36 witnesses who claim that they have flown the craft. The first one that I talked to, I thought she was absolutely insane. I'd never heard it. It was 39 years. I'd been doing the phenomena. I'd never heard it in my life. I thought she was insane. And then all these people started coming to me almost synchronistically, and friends that I knew, at Chris Bledsoe, I'd known him for years. And he said he'd flown the craft. I said, you flew the craft too? And I started encountering all these people, and I learned an awful lot. And this is the idea. You talk to the people who've been on the ship, and you start looking at the similarities of what they're telling you, and a lot of what that is lessons that these people they're not really doing stuff. They're sort of being taken through little scenarios, and they think they're doing one thing, and actually they're being taught to do something and bring a message back. So this is a book that I've written, and I'm actually going to do one on Whitley Strieber, where we're going to bring 3 people on who have actually flown the craft, and we're going to highlight these people. We've actually had confirmations of this now, of this whole idea that the mind is part of how you move the craft around. James Lukatsky said, he's the guy that ran the OSAP, the big $22 million program for Bigelow. He said, we have discovered that the craft is a combination of physical and psychic material. And that's what the cover-up, I think, is about. It's about the second element that they haven't got a clue. They're looking for technology. And as one experiencer was told, do not go down the technology road. It's a trap. Jim Semivan has confirmed that there's a consciousness connection to this thing. Jake Barber, the latest whistleblower, has come out and said, yes, they have these people who they call it psionics, which is basically CE5. They just give it it's almost like changing the word UFO to UAP. They want we want to sound cool. So we'll call it psionics. And then you saw the video that they had, these 2 little lights in the sky, their demonstration at the Esalen Institute, these 2 little lights in the sky. And the first thing I thought was, oh my God, Stephen Greer can do better than that. I mean, that's crazy. I was at a Skywatch with, in Arizona, we saw 49 objects with Gen 3 glasses in an hour and a half, and they had two objects, and Gary Nolan, who was there, didn't see anything. Bob Bigelow trying to get a craft, which I'll talk about in a second. Bob Bigelow talked about this, and he said a lot of the contractors have crafts, but they really aren't getting anywhere, and I think it has to do with consciousness. It has to do with consciousness. That's what it's about. I just did an interview yesterday with Jack Sarfati, which we're going to play. We talk about a craft that he encountered, a friend of his encountered, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Eric Davis has confirmed there's a consciousness connection to help put off. And James Ryder, extremely important. James Ryder, I believe, was the guy, a senior vice president at Lockheed, who actually offered a craft to Bigelow Aerospace. And he was a guy that I believe was in the skiff with Tom DeLonge. Tom DeLonge talks about being in the Lockheed skiff in 2015. And he said, one of the guys said, all I want to know is how to get here. How does the propulsion system work? And he said, because he was hanging around with Greer. He said, and it has to do with consciousness. And he said, then the guy said, he says, now you're talking. And he said, that's all the guy couldn't shut the guy up. He said, for 45 minutes, all the guy wanted to talk about was consciousness. This guy's in a Lockheed skiff. And I believe it was James Ryder, and he was giving it to Bigelow because they couldn't. He said, we can't figure it out. We've had it, and it's costing us a lot of money to store. People forget that it costs 10 times the amount for security as for the program. So they're wasting money hiding this craft that they can't do anything with. And according to Eric Davis, hinted that they're supposed to give it back in 1989, and they didn't give it back. So James Ryder offered it to Bob Bigelow, and because had this consciousness effect, they couldn't get it to work. And so he said, you can get it if the Air Force agrees and if the CIA agrees. And of course, the CIA blocked it, and the Air Force said there was a 1953 memo or something that says not only you're not going to give it to somebody, but you got to keep it indefinitely. And this is the whole deal. So they got this craft and they can't do anything with it, and they're paying all this money for security. Now here's the developments. Here's the interview we did with Jack Sarfati. And Jack Sarfati had a Navy guy, and we questioned him 3 times about this. He had a Navy guy, this we believe was from Lockheed, and he said that the guy said that the craft is conscious. So this is what the 36 witnesses told me. The craft is alive, it's conscious. He added 2 things that I had never heard before. It has its own will, that the craft has its own will. This is a guy that ran the program for this craft for 4 years. And not only that you cannot get in the craft until the craft lets you get in. So unless you've got the right mindset, you don't get in the craft. And that suddenly occurred to me what James Lukatsky had said during an interview with Bob, with Knapp and with Corbell. He said, he talked about this thing. People say the government they're being lied to. So he talks about a meeting in a congressional facility.
So if they're being lied to, why is he having a meeting? Why is the head of OSAP having a meeting in a congressional facility? That's Congress. That's the House and Senate. And he said there was a senator in the meeting, and it was a long meeting in this facility. And we've now identified the senator as being Senator Reid, who was one of the gang of 8, who supposedly is being told the brief story that we got this stuff, and they are have this very high security clearance. And so this guy stated that they couldn't get inside the craft. And so when Lakatsky was talking, he said part of the meeting was about the fact that we've got this craft and we've managed to get inside it. And then it made sense why he said that we managed to get inside it, that they had this craft for decades and they couldn't get inside the craft because the craft only allows you in if it wants you to let you in. It's a complete conscious craft with its own will, and it's controlling the disclosure. It's not a thing that crashes and you just get a diamond drill and you drill in there and the hit the right button and the thing pops open. This is a conscious thing that lets people in, and this is where you see the crafts have become much more complex than the original crafts, say from 1896. Now you get these crafts almost like they're bringing in new crafts and giving us new ideas and just developing making more and more complex as they gradually, the phenomena tells us what's going on. And the important thing again here is consciousness. It's the fact that these things are consciousness. So when I had these people, the bottom line was that people would find themselves on a craft. And I had a retired U.S. Air Force colonel that flown combat in Iraq. I had a 747 United Airlines pilot. I had a couple other pilots and stuff. And they basically all tell the same story. You're on the craft and you're told to touch something, or you're asked, where do you want to go? So Ron Johnson told the story. He said, I was sitting there and I was sitting in this chair that was like it was built for me. And he said, Ron, where would you like to go? And he said, I'd like to see the Milky Way from a distance. They said, okay, Ron. And here's the important part. They said, Ron, it is within you. Go within yourself, and when you can imagine it, then we'll go there. And a number of witnesses were told us it's within you. It's the same thing as remote viewing. You're not going anywhere. You're going to go look at Jupiter or whatever. You're not saying, hang on, I'll fly in there. I'll be there in a minute. It's like you give the guy the number 453709, and the remote viewer says, I'm at the target. You're instantly at the target. And the whole thing is almost this Sufi expression that Guru uses. The Sufi expression, you see yourself as a puny form when within you is enfolded the entire universe. And that's what we may be coming down to, that this is all within us, that out-of-body experiences, you got to go within to go without, and it's all within us. And that's where these kids are pulling this stuff, that they're pulling it out of this field, and it's all within us. And so you have the people on the craft, and then they're told to touch something. So Ron was touching the end of the arms of this chair, and he said there was they said it could be a very intense G-force. He was the only guy that talked about the G-force, but it was intense G-force for 1 second. He said the front window opened, and there in the distance was the Milky Way, which would have been, estimate 60, 70,000 light years. He moved in 1 second. If that story is true, unless they are faking this thing and making them imagine this happened, there's something wrong with our idea of time and space. Because the other one that talked about going within actually went from the other side of the galaxy to point, and it was instantaneous, they said. And a lot of them will say it's instantaneous, and that you touch the craft is alive, you become one with the craft. And whatever you think is what the craft does. You can think instantaneously. And that's why the military is so heavy trying to get this material, because it's this whole idea of controlling a craft with your mind. And if you go back, there's a 2004 experiment. If you Google search rat brain and F-22, you will see an experiment that was done at University of Southern Florida before this thing went black. And they have 20,000 neurons of a rat brain, and they teach it to fly an F-22 simulator. That's where we're going. If you're going to have AI, it's got to have biological components to it. If you have just a classical computer, it's just a switch, off, on. It doesn't even know it's a switch. It has no clue. But if it's like a body with every cell in the body can create another body, and it can reproduce everything. It knows what the rest of the body's doing. And that's what this is. It's this biological thing that has intelligence, and it can store unlimited intelligence and tap into the field and create things. So this biological craft shows what AI is going to look like in the future. It's going to be this biological thing that has its own will and its own thoughts. Now we get to this thing where I sort of challenge people. See how much time I got here. 39. Okay. Challenge people to this idea that we shouldn't we should get the disclosure right now. Now, we did the book UFOs Area 51 and Government Informants, where we went after Dr. Eric Walker, who's the highest level official anybody's ever talked to. He had 14 honorary doctorate degrees. He was president of Penn State University for 15 years. He was the chairman of the board of the top military think tank in the country, where DARPA came from, where the Jasons came from. He helped develop that. He helped Vannevar Bush create in the late 1940s security policy for the U.S. military. And what he said to us, he said, you jump to hasty conclusions. Maybe so. He's talking about a crash, which I now believe is the 1952 Arizona crash, which they supposedly got up and walked away. They landed the craft and they walked away. And when he said, first though, he told us, he said, how do you know they didn't walk away? And I thought, yeah, come on, what, do you think we're stupid? They were not going to walk away. And then that's what he says. Maybe some walked away, maybe they didn't, because we were asking about Roswell. And he said, you're running to hasty conclusions. Maybe some walked away, maybe some did not walk away. As I say, it's none of your business. Just to satisfy your curiosity is not going to do any damn good except to make you happy. Is that not true? Are we to change all the plans and regulations? And it was when I heard that in 1990, I said, oh shit, there's plans. They actually have plans and regulations. And this is the deal where it is that they actually have, but there's so much security. There's so much fear and so many levels of security. You can't get to the bottom of the whole thing, but there are plans and regulations. It was drawn up just to make you happy. If you say that you're looking for the truth, you will never get it anyway, so forget it. Often he told us this thing, unless you have the mind of Einstein, you will never get anywhere. And that's what I'm seeing. This thing is getting more complex and more complex. And it's not a simple thing that we've got this puzzle and we've got this one little piece. They give us this one little piece and we're going to be all flying around in, little spaceships. If that were true, we would not have lost the Afghan war to a bunch of guys driving around on camels and donkeys. I do not believe we have the technology. It is a little bit, we may have some metal technology we've developed from it, but the whole concept of consciousness is the concept that has to be developed. This is where Lukatsky talks about this book, where he talks about the fact that they had this meeting and Reed was in the room, which means that at least Reed, one of the senators, was briefed. He knew. And that's where Reed got very upset when people said that he said there was crash material and he wanted people to reverse it. And he wanted people to reverse those statements because he had been caught violating security oaths and talking about something he shouldn't have been talking about, the fact that we had recovery material. Jim Semivan talks about another aspect that I found very interesting. At one point, he's talking about his encounter. He's a SES-2, which is equivalent to a 2-star general in the CIA, retired in 2008, but had an experience and in his room with beings. And he, at one point, says, you see the spiritual implications to this thing. He said, I was standing there. He was asked, was there telepathy involved? And he said, yeah, it's the most interesting part. I was standing there and there was a being behind me. I don't know what it was, but he said it had this guardian type thing going on about it. And I went, guardian type thing. And we asked the interviewer, I said, ask him, is it on the right side or left side? Because if you've studied Michael Newton and Journey of Souls, where we go, reincarnate, and he took 7,000 people, let them die in their last lifetime and took them into the spirit world. And they all said the same thing. And they all talk about when you die, you go in front of a council between 3 and 12 people, and they ask you, how did it work out? And you can't bring up Hillary Clinton. You can't bring up your mother-in-law. Dog ate the homework. You planned the whole thing. We planned to do this thing. You're going to be an alien. I'm going to be a human. We come in and we play our little roles. And everybody says the same thing when they come out is the fact that I could have done better. That's what they say. I could have done better. I was going to do this and I got scared. But the guardian angel stands behind you on the left side. And so I'm thinking to myself, oh, there's a lot of people that said that. So I actually went to Whitley Strieber. I said, Whitley, you're on the craft, aren't you? He said, yeah. I said, hey, a lot of these people are talking about there's somebody behind them, and the person behind them is telling them what to do. This Air Force retired colonel. And he said he didn't know it was humans or aliens or who it was, but somebody behind him was telling them what to do. And I said, did you ever have that experience? He said, all the I said, I told you I was going to steal it. I was thinking of stealing the craft. I was sitting there at the panel board and I was going to steal the craft. And somebody behind me, he thought to himself, I think I'm going to steal this thing. And somebody behind him started laughing telepathically. And he said he believed there was always somebody behind him. And this is this whole idea that there may be a staged thing where your guardian angel is there and this is all a big play and you're learning something or whatever. And it's not what we think it is. Lukowski is an important guy to listen to because he's a guy that is trying to get this material out. And when he describes this fact that if you knew what was inside the craft, you'd know that everything else is primitive. And you hear these stories of the fact that Chris Bledsoe talked about it, Lovelace talked about it, this idea that the craft is 30 feet across and you go inside and it's the size of a football stadium inside. And Jacques Vallée had these type of cases. Hal Puthoff talked about these kind of cases. And I remember the woman that first told me this in Phoenix, Arizona. And she dropped this thing about she's flying the craft. And I thought, come on, you're crazy. Yeah, come on. I was thinking women in Saudi Arabia can't even drive a car without a man. And they let you fly the flying saucer with no license. I mean, come on, you're 70 years old or 75, whatever she was. Letting you fly a craft. Should you have flown 3 different models? And she dropped that on me. And then the next thing bomb she dropped on me, she says, you can, the craft, they can make the craft as big as they want. And then she said, and this is 2013 already. So you can see how nobody had ever talked about it. And suddenly this stuff's almost like it's coming into the zeitgeist. This stuff starts coming in and people start remembering and they start telling this stuff. So she said, they've got crafts that are as big as solar systems. I said, what? You kidding? She said, yeah, they can make the craft as big as they want. Now we've got stories of, for example, Susie Hansen, who's the top researcher in New Zealand, has written 2 books on the Greys and the technology she's been taught. And she said that they told her on the ship, they said, watch, we're going to make the craft bigger. And she said she watched and the walls started to move out. And she said, went so far, she couldn't see the walls anymore. And this is the whole idea. It's this consciousness thing. Everything is made out of consciousness. We believe this thing, it's nouns, it's physical. And if you break it back, it's not. It's energy, it's consciousness. And the bottom line is that the original source, whatever it is, God, whatever we want to call it, creates the waves. And the waves are the sparks of the divine. And we're creating the heavens and the earth. God does not create anything. He gives us free will and he gives us the ability to create stuff. And what we're doing is we're putting stuff in. We're inputting stuff, making the world more elaborate, more magnificent. The universe is getting bigger. And that's what it is. That's what we're doing. We're doing this process of this creation of the universe. And we've done this. And it's all made out of mind forms. The idea of the physical universe is a perception. It's like the world is flat. The sun's going around the earth. There's only one galaxy. There's only 5,000 stars. No. Everything you see is going to be wrong. It's this different world. And that's what's so hidden in the world that some of the people know this kind of stuff. But how do you bring this out to people who have now the stat is that in the United States, there's 43% of people in the United States who are reading at a grade 5 level. I mean, how do you bring out this kind of stuff to people who are just trying to make a living and just trying to pay the bills and take the kid to soccer practice? And this is the other big question. So he said curiosity, and that's why I said to people, because people want this out, but all it is curiosity. Walker is absolutely right. He says, you're just curious. Admit it. You're just curious. And I'll say to people, why do you want it out? And I go, I don't know. I just want to know. And it's like, yeah, that's just curiosity. So if you're running this thing and you've got this thing and you're looking at weapons and you got evil Russians and Canadians and Greenlanders and China and weapons we don't want everybody else to develop it. We want these weapons to develop. And so you get in this situation where they have a reason why they want it. They're working on it, why they're not covering it up. But we really don't have a good reason why we want it disclosed. We just say we want it disclosed. Are we paying taxes? Well, if you're paying taxes, according to Semivan, this thing is a PED. It's a presidential executive emergency action document, which means it's being run by the White House. It's not being. And it's exempt from disclosure to Congress. It's a thing like the presidential security. So I'm paying taxes. I want to know when the president's coming to my city and what streets he's going to drive down. They're going to go, get lost. We're not going to tell you. I want to know what happens if there's a nuclear war. What are the plans for the nuclear war? Where are they going to move the president? They're not going to tell you that kind of stuff. That's a PED. That's an emergency thing. And the same thing happened with UFOs because the head of emergency management in Canada was brought to the United States and was briefed. And on his deathbed, he told Paul Hellyer, I just want to tell you something. This is things for real. I went and signed my life away at Langley, and they told me that's what you need. So you're a very fearful society. All the world's a fearful society. We build up fear. So what you need an emergency action plan. And so what happens if this happens? What happens if this happens? And all these contingency plans you're working on because you're living in this world of fear. So the curiosity thing is really not a sufficient need. That's what we're trying to push, or because we pay taxes, whatever. And that's what Walker said. Why should we change the rules and regulations to satisfy your curiosity? We don't care if you're curious. We don't. And so it comes to the bottom level is the book I'm going to write is no government UFO disclosure, because that's all weapons, but real disclosures. The second part is to get real disclosure, to talk to the experiencers as to what's really going on. What are the beings saying? What are they telling us? What's really going on? What is the nature of reality? Forget about the weapons, forget about the enemies, all that crap. Let's go to the experiencers, and they're always left out. If you see Soul, the Soul Conference has actually said we are not going to allow the woo factor in there. And so you cut the experiencers out. If you look at all the major documentaries, you'll see no experiencers. Everybody wants to be cool. Everybody wants to talk about nuts and bolts and hardware and crash flying saucers. Because once you go, you even know that if you go to the Consciousness Life Expo, you get the people who are doing the crash stuff, and the room is jammed with 600 people. And then you go into a consciousness section, there's like 35 people there. People just haven't caught on yet. They haven't realized this thing has to do with the nature of reality. That's what they're telling us. That's what they're telling us. That's why you do weird stuff, like the article I wrote for Alan's book. It's called The Theory of Wow. Now I call it the Jesus Circus. You would not know who Jesus was. You would not know his message unless he'd walked on water, which is what the aliens do. They hover. They walk across the ground without touching the ground. They go, holy cow. And they fed 5,000 people. There's incidents, UFO incidents, where they've done that kind of thing, where they've made huge amounts of stuff appear where there was nothing there. And raised, cured people. 50% of all UFO experiencers say they can cure people, or they've been cured. So it's the same thing. And you would never know who Jesus was if he hadn't done the miracles. That's what they're doing. They're doing these miracles. They're telling you with the paranormal weird stuff. They're telling you that's not how it works. You think, oh, the world is flat. It's this, and that, and this is going on. And they're going, no, that's not how it works. And what they're doing is they're creating awe and curiosity, because unless you have awe and curiosity, which everybody watching this has awe and curiosity, we're all down the rabbit hole. They want you to have awe and curiosity because you're going to do research. If you've got it all figured out, you're not going to do any scientific research. It's like Gary Nolan says, I'm not interested in the 95% that fall inside the bell curve. I'm interested in the dots that fall outside the bell curve. That's where the Nobel Prize is. Why is that thing outside the bell curve? Why are people levitating? Why is all this kind of stuff happening? And it tells you the world is not the way you think it is. And so Walker said, what are you going to do when you figure it out? And in the end, people don't really have an answer to that either. The military people have an answer to that. But for the common people on the street, it's basically just curiosity, or it's this idea that you have a lot of scientists say, we want it put in the white world. So I say it's compartmentalized. We can't figure this thing out. That, I believe, is nonsense, because if you take a look at how Skunk Works actually started, it started when they built the first jet fighter after World War II. The Germans had the jet fighter, and they went to Lockheed, and they formed Skunk Works to build the first jet fighter. They built it in 143 days, and they had the same compartmentalized need to know type stuff. And they built the F-117 in 18 months. The compartmentalization is how it works. They can build crafts. It's like if that was true, that everything doesn't work because it's compartmentalized, they wouldn't invent anything. They've got all sorts of stuff coming out. They know how it works. It's their rules. But when it comes to us, we really don't have a really good reason, except a lot of these people say we want it in the white world because everybody knows. Tim Taylor, the story of Tim Taylor with the one invention that company was, and I don't know what else was in the company, was sold on NASDAQ for $100 million. Everybody knows there's a lot of money. So if you're a scientist, you want it in the white world because I want to make some money too. I want to see the craft. So if they're going to put the crafts into the public, what are you going to do? If the crafts are in the black world, because they go with sole source contract as they do with any. If you want that stuff to discovered, you're not going to put a contract, say, we got a UFO from Roswell here, and we want people to analyze this thing, and everybody can come and take a look at it and see the specs and see what we want to come out of this thing. The Russians will be there looking at it. No, you're not going to do that. You got to do it secretly. So you go with sole source contract, as they did with Bigelow. Bigelow can do this. We give them the contract, and then you seal the whole thing down with security. And this is where we're sort of missing the boat, that we think that's illegal, that's bad what they're doing. They were hired to do that. And now you're saying, oh, we hired you to do that. Now we want you to give the craft back. And they go, to hell with you. Even Bigelow said that. Forget it. We're not going to do it. And Brandon Fugel said, forget it. It's this thing is we put all our money in it. Now you want it back. I mean, what kind of deal is that? There was a deal that said, we will never identify who you are. You will never say you work for the CIA. And that's how these contracts, and they're run all the time. That's how the government works. It does these sole source contracts in order to keep it secret. You can't put it into the newspaper. And so now you have these guys with this material. And the question is, if you get back like this eminent domain, if you get it back, what are you going to do? I mean, you have this Burchett guy who's always talking about just give the stuff out. What's he going to do? Take it easy. Oh, has a horse farm. You're going to get a wagon and a bunch of horses, go to Lockheed and put a saucer on his back and take it to his garage and start working on it. What are you going to do with the saucer? You're going to give it to a contractor, because you have to give it to a contractor. You got to give it to somebody who's an expert at it. And the experts have it now. So you're going to take it from them. And then who are you going to give it to? You got to give it to somebody. And people say, well, give it to Elon Musk. So then you give it to your friends, give it to your relatives and stuff like that. This is the difficult problems you have in what's going on, is that these laws were built on how the security is done, how stuff is built. And now you got to get out of this problem of you gave it to Lockheed and this company went broke because you didn't give anything to them. And Lockheed made a lot of money from this. And all these lawsuits that Michael talked about are going to be all over the place when you get it. And that's what's stopping them from putting it out. They don't want the lawsuits. So that's about it. We're in the Western world, and we are in a situation where we've built this thing, but I think we're at a crossroads where consciousness has really gained. When I first started, nobody's talking about consciousness. Now everybody's talking about consciousness. And even though they don't know what they're talking about, and they know it's a buzzword, and it's happening in science as well, where you can talk about consciousness, you can talk about UFOs. We've gotten to this point where the discussion is going to take place, and it's going to come from the bottom up. And that's the way the phenomena has done it, except for a couple of instances. The incident at CIA in 1959, where they had a contact event, and right at Holloman Air Force Base, where they had a contact, which actually was actually given to Steven Spielberg, which became Close Encounters of the Third Kind. That event actually happened, the Close Encounters of the Third Kind event that Spielberg wrote up. So we have those events, but we more and more we're realizing that the experiencers have a lot of material. And that's why when Chris Bledsoe had this very high level of contact, all these military and industrial people came to him, and they went to him and they said, he said, "What are you doing? My kids they're being harassed in school. I need you guys to leave. You're destroying my family. You're all over the place. Why are you here?" And they said, "Well, Chris, it appears they like you, Chris, and they're talking to you, Chris. They don't like us. They're not talking to us. So we're here to find out what you're doing." And that's the whole thing. You go to the experiencers. As when I talked to Tim Taylor, he said, "Well, you want these two women?" He said, "One used to live near you." And I said, "Yeah, really?" He said, "We'd like to talk to her." I said, "Yeah, sure." And she had this really bizarre story and he was keeping track of her. He was keeping track. She was writing down all her encounters, all her premonitions and stuff. And Tim I don't know how many experiences he was dealing with, but he was following these people. That's what you got to do. You got to, like when he went to Tim Taylor went to Rome, to the Vatican library. I was told that he was looking for levitating monks. And that's the thing. There's going to be technology. You're looking at the monk. How did he levitate? There's a glow on his face. They all had the glow on their face. And he's trying to figure this thing with technology. And that's where we got to go. But we got to go to the experiencers. We're still in this idea of waiting for a handout from the government. And the way I see it, there's no chance the government is going to drop this thing anytime soon. They're digging in. And you're going to get a lot of these stuff. Even the witnesses that come forward, I'm still very, very skeptical, because when these witnesses come forward, first thing I always think, like I said to Sarfati about this Navy guy telling them about the craft and it's alive and all this kind of stuff. I said, well, why would he tell you this? Why isn't he in jail? Like, how does this security thing work? If the Congress can't find out, why are these guys coming out? It's sort of like, I'm going to tell you what the launch codes for the missiles, and I want to be a whistleblower and I want protection. It's like, no, it's like all these security laws are built for a reason. And these guys coming out, and I always think they may not know that they're working, the government has given it, but the government has given them authorization to talk. And they're gradually leaking the story out. And it's the same thing that the intelligence is doing. It's been doing this right from the word go. And that's what they said. We know how to land a plane. Don't worry. They know exactly what they're doing. And they are coming from the bottom up. They are going to people on the street. And as the people go together and they start talking, almost like the telepathy tape started, where they found one kid who was telepathic and then found another. Then they found those two kids were talking to each other, and it built to the biggest podcast in the world. And that's what's going to happen. These ideas are going to come from the ground up rather than the government down. So I'll leave it at that.
Amazing. Thanks, Grant. Always amazing. A couple of questions come up. You say go back to the experiencers, but a lot of people say the experiencers only know what the beings want them to know. That's one part of the question. And are we being led like a carrot in front of us, where the horizon's always the same distance away, or are we actually getting closer to the goal line? So those are two basic questions.
Yeah, we are being led. Sure, we're being led by the phenomena, no doubt about it. And yes, they are leading us to. If you look at when I started, I didn't know any of this stuff. There was no idea of consciousness or live crafts or telepathy or anything. It was just straight. It was like UFOs, and the odd time they land and they burn circles. Well, for example, the burning of circles, the ground traces, 4,000 of them, that stopped in 2000, even before 2000. It hasn't been for 25 years. And then you start to realize like they're gradually moving us down the road, but they're doing it through this paranormal thing. They're doing it through this thing where it makes you curious, and you can't let it go. And then you get to a situation where the government is slowly leaking stuff to climatize people, which was put out in the Rand report in the 1960s, where people say, "Oh, we don't want catastrophic disclosure." I said, "What could possibly be catastrophic disclosure? Come on, what happened in 2017?" I remember I wrote an article called "The 64 Reasons They Decided Not to Tell You the Truth." In 2009, 2017, the New York Times puts it on and says, "Oh yeah, there are UFOs and the government is studying them." And everybody goes, and the idea was the stock market is going to melt down, people are going to commit suicide. And what happened? Absolutely nothing. They're doing, yeah, we knew that already. Come on, it's stupid. We knew that. And that's going to be the same thing. So what's catastrophic disclosure? Oh, they're going to say they got crafts and bodies. I'll guarantee you, if they make an announcement on Fox or CNN or something that they've got crash material, people are going to go, yeah, we knew that already. Yeah, they've acclimatized people. They're moving people down the road. And now they're starting to leak this consciousness stuff into the field. Even Lukatsky said the next book, he's going to talk about what's inside the craft. And that's his weird thing where he said there was no engine and there was no fuel tank. And yet the craft was alive. And I went to Chris Bledsoe and I said to Chris, they're flying around that orb for 3 days. He said it was 3 months. It appeared to be 3 days, but it was 3 hours, and it was 3 months. And he said, Grant, I've never seen an engine ever. And then you start hearing these people don't see an engine.
Grant, no. Well, no, when you first started writing about the sky pilots, I thought, oh, well, Grant really lost it here. And then, Jacob Barber says, yeah, we're flying the plane. So you're absolutely right, about.
Yeah. Yeah, you're getting these confirmations from high-level government officials that this consciousness thing is a factor. And Bob Bigelow said the reason they're not getting anywhere, he said, I think it has to do with consciousness. And he has a consciousness institute. And the guy that wrote Hunt for Zero Point, his wife had this bizarre experience where she was in this field where she knew the answer to everything, which is the same thing as UFO experiencers. They have answers to everything. 40% of them claiming on the ship at one point they knew the answer to everything, which would indicate that the aliens know the answer to everything. Because they gave it to these people, the access to it. So they're not here to analyze the soil or to figure out how we work, how our ego works. They know the answer. They're doing something else. And even Chris Bledsoe, I asked Chris Bledsoe, I said, hey, Chris, you flew the craft. I said, all these military people, did they ever ask you how you flew the craft? He said, oh, yeah, they brought a 1-star general in. And he asked me, and I showed the 1-star general how to fly the craft. So they're watching, and this consciousness thing is starting to come out. And when you get the telepathy tapes doing 1.5 million listeners per podcast, we're making a move. People always want everything yesterday. We got to realize we got in eternity. We live forever, and it doesn't matter. It's what you learn. It's not what cards are played to you. It's what you're learning, and that's what they're doing. They're slowly dripping this stuff out, and it's getting more complex, and the government is doing it as well. There's some sort of disclosure problem thing where they're allowing these guys to talk. Otherwise, all these guys will have to be in jail. First thing I do is lock them up.
Grant, do you feel that the drip disclosure is happening as it should? Because ultimately, at first, I mean, years ago, I would say that we should have full disclosure, not drip disclosure. But the way that they've been doing this and climatizing people to this information seems like they first started with basically saying that there's this program out there. And then we have David Grush with the milestone of, well, I'm connected to people that are in these programs. And now we have people that are saying that they're part of these programs. So it seems like it's been a constant, like, okay, this is the next layer of it. So what's your take on the way that the drip disclosure is happening right now? And is it a good thing?
Yeah, I think they're allowing these people to advance ideas, especially the Lukatsky one, where he's asked what's the inside of the craft. He confirms, yes, we got inside this craft, indicating that they couldn't get in for years, and they finally found a way to get in. And this Navy guy claims it was because the craft let him in. And so you get that. And then he says, when they ask him what's inside the craft, he said, I have to take it through to DOPSR. I have to get it approved. I'm going to try to get it in the next book. So why are they allowing him to talk about
this, or why are they allowing Barbara to talk about psionics? I mean, is that not going to be classified? The fact that they're talking UFOs out of the sky and stuff like that's got to be classified. If that's not classified, what's classified? And that's the idea that they sort of drop it, but you got no proof. So it's the guy's testimony against, everybody says the guy's crazy. He's got a background of, suicide or whatever. They bring up and they hammer the witness. Like I talked to Ron Pandolfi all the time. It's the same thing. Everything's plausible deniability. He won't say anything on the record. He won't say anything on camera, but he's dropping all these stories, and it's always plausible deniability. Oh, you made it up. Cameron Stone quotes, this sort of stuff. And that's what they do. Is these guys are out on their own, and you get somebody as good as David Grush, and he has all this stuff, and then he gets caught, or you get in a situation where I sort of laughed at the lawyer, Danny
Sheehan.
Danny Sheehan. So Danny Sheehan, I've never done a non-disclosure agreement. And then he's telling all these stories. He tells the one story about the guy with the craft where it's bigger on the inside than outside. And then then the next interview I hear, he says, I can't talk about that. Can't talk about that. And they said to him, you're a lawyer for us. And if you want to stay in the program, you got to keep quiet. So without a non-disclosure agreement, they handcuff Danny Sheehan. So that's what they're doing. They're putting this sort of stuff out, and then they pull it back. And I say there's no way that these guys should be walking around telling these stuff. That's got to be classified. I mean, it just amazes me, and yet the phenomena is still controlling it. And even Jim Semivan says that for sure. He was asked who's running the show, like in the government. He said they are. And that seems to be true, that this phenomena is running the show, and it's probably done it 1,000 times. It knows exactly what to do, and it's using this theory of wow, this trying to get people interested, where people are talking about it. The more everybody talks about it, like with this, you get bigger audiences, and the consciousness, even though people don't really believe it, the consciousness rises up. And as Max Planck says, you do not convince your opponent that he's wrong by giving him evidence. You win by your opponent dying, one funeral at a time. The new generation is not offended with the idea. So if you talk about now and you go to kids, you'll say, are there beings from other planets? Well, of course there is. I mean, they'll do the whole thing. The consciousness, even though we don't realize, the consciousness is rising, and it will flip, and it'll be like 2017, where everybody's just going to say, yeah, we knew that already, and it just happens.
Well, actually, so right now I'm living with my sister and brother-in-law here, and they're not in this world, but they every night they're watching something on TV, and there's this dating show. It's one of the most famous dating shows. I think it's Love is Blind or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And they team up two people together, and they're in different rooms, and they can't see each other, and the whole time they get to know each other, and then they eventually they might marry each other, right?
Yeah.
So in one of the I'm sitting down there. And all of a sudden, this girl and this guy's trying to get to know each other. And then he's like, what are you into? And she goes, have you heard about the UFO crash retrieval programs? And like, I'm telling you, this is the most mainstream of mainstream dating shows. Yeah. And she does this whole thing, to be honest, she kind of acted like a stoner when she was doing it, like she was high or something. Yeah. But she was breaking it down, saying, did you hear about it? And then multiple episodes, when they were just sitting and talking, she was bringing up this information because she's into it. So I'm just getting into like how it's creeping into every single level,
Yeah, I remember when the New Jersey thing happened, I got more questions about New Jersey from people who had never talked to me, because I don't talk to people about UFOs, because you can see their eyes rolling back. But I got so many questions. I must have got 20 people. And people run into restaurants, and people at the next table are talking about the New Jersey drones. That was the biggest movement of any story I've ever seen, the New Jersey thing, even though nothing was proved. But everybody knows that New Jersey story, that they were flying around New Jersey.